So just yesterday we published our RTX Super review, and if you're interested in learning more, you can check it out right over here. But in it, we actually had a difficult time coming up with a conclusion because we didn't know how good the AMD RX 5700 series would compete against NVIDIA's new GPUs. But with all of yesterday's benchmarks done, could we accurately predict where the RX 5700 XT and the RX 5700 would land in comparison to the RTX 2070 Super and the RTX 2060 Super? Did NVIDIA get their older GPUs out of trouble just in time, or does AMD now have a serious problem? Well, it turns out AMD did publish some pretty specific performance numbers at E3, and that might lead to some interesting comparison, but more on that right after a quick message from our sponsor.
The new Be Quiet Dark Rock Slim Cooler offers high physical clearance for any memory module thanks to its slim heatsink and the low-profile 120mm airflow optimized fan, so you get great cooling, low noise, easy installation, and no issues for high-profile RAM. Check it out below.
Alright, so I'm going to start things off by making something very clear. You should not take this as a scientifically accurate video, and you should definitely not use this for any purchasing decisions. In fact, this whole video started as a pretty interesting test, or a pretty fun little test, to see how accurate AMD's E3 presentation was. But now with the new RTX supercards around, we might be able to use AMD's own numbers to estimate how well the RX 5700 series would compete when they finally launch next week. So let's start with what AMD showed. It was this chart for the RX 5700, which showed a 2 to 21% advantage over the Founders Edition RTX 2060. And this one had everything from a 3% loss to a 22% gain when the RX 5700 XT was compared against the Founders Edition RTX 2070. Those are pretty impressive numbers too. I want to pause here for a bit because 5 of these 10 games are the ones we use in our own benchmarking process, while Far Cry New Dawn has nearly identical performance results as Far Cry 5 since it uses the same game engine. Now that got Mike and I thinking about how they would line up against the benchmarks we used in the Super Series video from yesterday. So basically use those percentages and extrapolate from our results, right? Well, you guys can hate as much as you want on this, but it would be really cool to see how the numbers would line up when we post our full reviews of the RX 5700 series. So before I get into what we came up with, let me explain to you why this is a quick and fun little comparison that we wanted to try rather than being super serious. Get it? Super serious? I don't know if that was a bad joke, but first of all, according to AMD's testing notes, they used a stock 9900K and we used an overclocked 9900X to eliminate any CPU bottlenecks. But luckily these games aren't CPU limited at 1440p resolution. We also have no idea which scenes AMD chose to benchmark with, yet improvements are usually seen across the entire game and not just a single scene. But then there's this, which mysteriously says best performing API for both GPUs. And to us, that means each game comparison could have been mixed DX9, DX11, or DX12 results, which is super odd and a bit misleading. Finally, we decided to include the RTX 2070 Founders Edition, but not the RTX 2060 Founders Edition, and that's because the 2060 Founders isn't pre-overclocked, so I just used a stock RTX 2060 in its place. Plus, we know how AMD used Founders Edition GPUs since they mentioned it in a PC World livestream last week. But let's get into what we found, starting with Assassin's Creed. The Supers actually do improve quite a bit, and adding the 2% improvements for the 5700 and the XT doesn't really change things by all that much. Then again, moving to Battlefield 5 tells a whole different story. Here, NVIDIA shows some pretty good improvements with the super cards, but add in the 5700 series and AMD is claiming 22% and 21% improvements for the XT and the non-XT cards over the Founders Editions, and that's huge, especially since these two cards cost less than NVIDIA's Super Series. On the surface of things, the Supers do well in Far Cry 5, but add the 5 and 12% stated by AMD's presentation, and they're still trailing the RTX 2070 and 2060 Super, but really not by all that much, which is likely why NVIDIA priced their GPUs so close. Metro Exodus is a pretty interesting title too, since it is an NVIDIA-friendly title, but man, AMD claims of between 15 to 16% improvements over the original RTX 2070 and 2060, and that seems really impressive right here. Shadow of the Tomb Raider is actually an interesting one here since AMD was pretty open about showing the RX 5700 XT losing by 3% and the 5700 winning by 6%. Pop in those into our chart and this is what you get. I won't make any conclusions, but like I said, it's nice to see a company admitting where some of the improvements are needed. Finally, there's Witcher 3, which hasn't been a really kind title for AMD since the beginning, but it's still an awesome game. And again, the AMD cards slide right in between the Super series, but man, imagine if those cards wouldn't have launched, NVIDIA could have been in some trouble. So looking at the results, they should give you at least a vague idea on how AMD claims their RX 5700 series GPUs would stack up against the RTX Super cards. Now, as I mentioned at the very beginning of this video, please do take these unscientific results with a grain of salt. And I'm completely aware that we'll get hate from both sides, but heck, I think that this was a pretty cool comparison either way. Now, what I'm really looking forward to seeing is how these numbers would turn out into reality when the 5700 XT and the 5700 reviews get published next week. So I'm stoked for that. But based on all of this, it's possible that NVIDIA may have been a bit too conservative with the Super series pricing. Maybe all they did was to avoid the RX 5700 series rather than competing with it, but that could also mean that AMD is in a pretty good position. Personally, I think the most important aspect is the Radeon lineup has finally been able to achieve good results against the RTX series at similar power consumption numbers. Remember, the RTX 5700 XT has a board power of 225 watts, and the 5700 has 185. However, NVIDIA needed to really push their 12nm process here with the RTX 2070 Super at 215 watts and the 2060 Super at 175 watts. So should AMD be worried? Well, if we use their benchmark numbers, absolutely not, but we're just gonna have to wait or hold our breath for just a bit longer so that we could paint the whole picture as to what both teams are offering, especially for the price points, and we'll have scientific results to prove that. So let me know what you guys think about this little quick comparison, a pretty fun one actually, in the comments. I'm curious to know. I'm Ibor with Hardware Canucks. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to check out some relevant content over here. Subscribe for some cool content coming in the pipeline, and I'll see you guys in the next one.